When you're losing control, you have two options, right? You decide to give up or you tighten control, obviously. If you measure freedom by a small state with few regulations, which most sensible people do in the UK, I would imagine, then Britain's freest years were probably late Victorian liberal decades. But of course, we also had no welfare state and workhouses and quite a bit of lead poisoning. So probably we don't want to go back there. I get it. If you measure it by everybody actually having rights and living without permanent emergency, then the date was probably the 1990s. That was quite a good time. Banana armour and stuff. Anyway, either way, the most free Britain sits before today's tangled web of quangos, statutory instruments and international guidelines, which are actually our rules, right? Because they are. And you know we talk often about the creeping control force of the UN. Well, today I'd like to share with you what Britain has just adopted. No one's told you about, and they just hoped you wouldn't notice. Far too much money and effort has gone into Agenda 30 worldwide for them to pull back now. Just because we're all getting pissed off and we're all getting poorer, right? They can't pull back now. You must understand that trillions of dollars are already being made, about 7 trillion, and many trillions more. It's forecast to be 40 trillion more dollars are involved and on the horizon within the next 20 years within this climate change bullshit agenda. And that's for the few to make, not the many. Legislation is in place and the end goal is in sight. Just because you're pissed off, they are not pulling back now. The UN and its henchmen, Club of Rome, Bilderberg, WEF, they don't care about the individual. They do not care about the refuseniks. Be me. They only care about completing the mission. Everything in their plan depends upon it. And as population dissatisfaction grows, pissed off little groups become louder, right? Even God has made a comeback. The only thing they can do is to double down, which means more legislation, not less. Remember this though, the UN does not impose legislation yet. So for all those people saying, this is new UN law, well, it kind of is. It just depends how your government is set up. And as you know, for the past 25 years, we've outsourced MP responsibility to quangos and committees and departments, and they just change the law by statutory instrument. So you never even get to hear about it. All perfectly democratic, by the way. Complete bullshit. But anyway, they'll tell you it's democratic. Anyway, the UN just sends down guidelines that are agreed. And these are interpreted and applied through countries mostly without a murmur, like under these statutory instruments and royal prerogative. Legislation just passes through, all supported and lobbied by huge global corporations, NGOs and foundations. Now, some of these people are ideological communists. Fine. Some of these people are ideological climate change maniacs. Fine. And others are money-grabbing megalomaniacs. Fine. I would say that mostly they're a mix of all three. In September 2024, the UN held a Summit for the Future meeting. Did you know that? See, I did tell you that they hadn't stopped at 2030 or 2050. I think they're working on 2150 now. But Britain and all 193 countries adopted the Pact for the Future. Yes, they plan your future too, not you. And this pact comes with 2 annexes, the Global Digital Compact and the Declaration on Future Generations. Pay attention, because it's all coming together now. You should be able to see things clearly. The first annex is called the Global Digital Compact. Right, this badass, all-encompassing guidance is a UN systems reference kind of manual, and it shapes AI governance and cooperation between countries, data governance principles between countries, platform safety and universal connectivity targets for all countries, pretty much everything to do with what we call the internet. In practice, it means government departments like Ofcom, the Cabinet Office, DCMS, and all the AI assurance schemes will all follow this instruction manual. You won't even know, and no MP will vote for it. These adjustments will simply be made within existing legislation. Now, the Global Digital Compact is billed as a vision for a free, open, and secure internet. But what it really does is create a new set of obligations and expectations for how the digital world is supposed to be run. Sounds fabulous, and not very free at all. When they say connectivity, you see they mean everyone, everywhere will be online, even if you don't want to be. Once every school, clinic, hospital, rural community is wired into these global systems, the choice of the individual to opt out of digital ID or state services becomes nearly impossible, right? No connection, no participation in society. Oh, and here's the brilliant bit. It's all taxpayer funded, with the profits going to the tech giants as usual. So they don't really need to mandate digital ID at all. Perhaps that was just a convenient distraction from funding, maybe? I don't know. But within these guidelines are the words platform safety and integrity, meaning governments and social media companies will work together to define what you should and what you shouldn't see online. And in the UK, Ofcom will probably wave this document about when they tighten the Online Safety Act codes, and you know this is coming. So safety becomes the pretext for governments and platforms deciding what is harmful or what is misinformation. Tech departments and tech companies will again become enforcement arms of government, but not one government, because they've all agreed the same, right? So they won't argue with each other anymore. They will remove content not because you broke the law, but because international best practice now decides what's harmful. And remember, we talked at length about information being the key to free speech, not free speech itself. Because without free information, there will be little unofficial knowledge for you to talk about or for them to censor. And all of this works for them because they also know that people will self-censor when platforms are obliged to police them against undefined shifting standards of integrity, whatever it is they decide you're allowed to say and you're not. So speech and information is all nicely controlled on platforms for them. 193 countries just agreed. And then we have data governance. And within the compact, this says responsible and interoperable data rules. And that means cross-border sharing and standardization. Well, in practice, it will allow the ICO in the Cabinet Office and whoever else in government to use this global digital compact to demand new compliance from companies. And again, this places additional burdens on small businesses. They can't comply with all of these rules, and so only the large corporations are compliant. Once interoperable standards are agreed, the UK will also align our data policies with the global norms under this compact, right? To agree things like, trade agreements, right? And that means losing control over who accesses UK citizens' information. It normalises cross-border data flow. Your health, financial and identity data can move freely between 193 jurisdictions because they've all agreed to the same rules. And as citizens will have little idea who ultimately holds our data. This underpins digital identity systems and eventually probably social credit style models. So when you go to Spain, for example, they already know all about you. And let's say you decide to go to Manila, well, they already know all about you too. Do you really want people knowing this information? Too late, we signed it. Now you understand why data companies are so desperate to invest in the basket case that is the UK. Anyway, then there's AI. And this is a dystopian nightmare. Unless, of course, you're into this sort of thing, right? I know some of you are, but you're weird. Get over it. The Global Digital Compact is a permanent global regime for AI. And the UN sees itself as an independent scientific panel with global authority, right? They've set up this panel, but the panel reports to them, so it's not that independent. Whoever controls this panel defines what counts as safe AI. And those assumptions will dictate every algorithm from job interviews to what news is shown on the TV, right? The UK won't make these rules anymore. It's just adopted them. Like every UN framework before it, it says it's non-binding. But that's until regulators, quangos, and procurement contracts make it unavoidable. That's how guidelines become law and how democracy gets bypassed. And you can see it all happening now without a single way of stopping it, unless, of course, the UN is broken up entirely. Now, on the side of this global compact is the Sustainable Development Goals stimulus. Stimulus just means more money. Basically, the UK and all the other 193 countries agreed to raise an extra $500 billion per year for the Sustainable Development Goals. And where do they get this money from? Well, genius. The development banks lend it, but they use government guarantees and IMS reserves to de-risk projects. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that Britain already pays into the IMF and guarantees the loans it gives to projects, right? And this is saying that Britain will guarantee all sorts of other loans to these mental climate change projects. So Britain will underwrite, guarantee with taxpayers' money, more deals. So it's our risk and their profit. Bloody great. I did tell you we were underwriting shit ideas, didn't I? So Treasury-style guarantees and first loss guarantees put taxpayers at the front of the crash when it happens, not the massive tech companies. They're all protected should their new idea fail. And it will prevent us from pulling out of funding on things like bollocks carbon capture bullshit, no matter how much it costs us. Because we've guaranteed it. The private business doesn't lose money. We do. Plus, they've added ridiculous ESG requirements that steer money only to projects that tick those boxes. So you thought woke was dead, right? Not in the eyes of the UN. They just made up some more rules. And we just agreed. Brilliant. And then the next part is the Declaration on Future Generations in the Pact for the Future. Now, this is shorter and fluffier than the Global Digital Compact, but the implications are real. Actually, it reads a bit like a Star Trek manifesto. You know the bit in First Contact? It's absolutely bonkers stuff. I'm going to read you some of it. Stay with me. Don't be bored. It's fascinating. What they've written is, the guiding principles for this are that governments should act as trustees for people not yet born, weighing the interests of future generations alongside those alive today. Brilliant. What this now means is that climate change and sustainable development goal evangelists in the civil service, and climate change is not happening today, a bit like global warming didn't happen, so they changed it to climate change. Now what they're saying is, well, climate change might happen in the future. And so the civil service will effectively bar any proposal that may impact climate change in, say, 100 years. So roads, services, whatever. And it will, of course, make suing the government even easier. So those NGOs and charities that are getting funded by our government to save the planet, and then they sue the same government with the money the government gave them, will become so much easier. And of course, it's all regulated by quangos like the Climate Change Committee. Then they've got long-term thinking, and this says, encourages embedding foresight, scenario planning, and future impact tests into policy making. It says that GDP is not enough. Well-being, climate, equality, and sustainability metrics should be used in all budgets. Right, so in a near bankrupt country, the civil service will take well-being of citizens not born into account, because GDP is only important because, well, they don't know. But let me tell you, it's very important when your country is on the edge of bankruptcy. And yes, that noise you hear in the background, that's me banging my head on a brick wall in despair. Then it's got, personal favourite, institutional follow-up. And this proposes that the UK and 193 countries appoint a UN special envoy for future generations in our government. And that will mean in the UK a commissioner or even a cabinet position. And there may even be a statutory requirement for departments to consult with this unelected person in our government on major policies. And that means the UN is sat in the middle of our government, someone you did not vote for, overriding and overruling bills, because it could impact future generations, all taking democracy away from the very people expected to pay for it today. I mean, you must be outraged. I can't believe they've actually done this. And then it has national adoption, which urges states to build domestic institutions or mechanisms that take future generations into account when drafting laws, budgets, or strategies. This is what the commissioner would obviously have oversight on. And that means the current citizen is no longer priority, and the emphasis will be placed on stabs in the dark and crystal ball gazing, tea leaf reading. It means governments will build in excuses for not doing what voters want under the excuse of we have to think of the future. All funded by taxpayers now, with no benefit to you now, but with some random benefit in the future that they can't quantify and can't pinpoint. Absolute bollocks. And then there's accountability, because this compact also asks for regular reporting back to the UN on what governments are doing to integrate future considerations. What? We have to report back to the UN about how naughty or nice we've been? As the wheels come off the climate change and net zero bus, they must do all they can to tighten regulations and control. And I'll say it again. No, they're not laws when they come from the UN. They are guidance, but only because they don't need to be laws. Because when the UK adopts a UN policy, then it adopts it in full. The frameworks, toolkits, and compacts creep down from the UN into our quangos and departments. They get rubber stamped by statutory instruments, and then they quietly become the rules we then have to live under. We weren't asked, no MP debated it, yet our tax, our data, and our speech are already wired into it. Once everything is connected, opting out is no longer an option. No vote, No consumer choice, no off-grid escape. It's all sold as safety and fairness in the future, but the effect is to normalize a permanent emergency where unelected bodies set the limit for not only your freedom, but your children's. And you're paying for it. And this is why, when the policies fail, the answer is never less control, but always more. And this is why the battle isn't really about climate change or AI or digital ID at all. The battle is about consent, because in a democracy, the rules only work if you agree to them. When rules are written without your consent, they stop being rules and start being a cage. And the question now isn't whether these compacts are coming, they are, we sign them. The question is whether we notice soon enough and say no. Because the only power bigger than a global compact is a population that stops consenting to it. The only power bigger than the UN are populations that have spotted it and say, not us. We're just not doing it. So that's where we are. That's what's coming. That's what no one told you about. It was only a few months ago, did you know? What do you want to do? Tell me what you think. You might think it's a brilliant idea, and you know what? That's great. At least we've got the opportunity to discuss it, because no one in government was going to give it to you. Let me know. Like, comment, share, subscribe, send me rude notes, whatever. Until next time.